Hi, I'm Allie. Join me as I create this Delica Duet Pendant featuring an 18mm rivoli and sitting great on the neck. We're going to be using a combination of a couple sizes of Delica beads, so make sure if you need any materials, go ahead and look below the video in the description that's listed there. Hit that little show more button and you'll get the link to our site. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go in and use some 8O Delicas. Yes, I said 8O Delicas. They're larger. You can see them here in the sample piece with that pink design. We're going to use those and we are going to put onto our Dragonthread size 6, 24 of those beads. That is going to connect and we're going to tie it in a circle to create the bezel for our design. From there we're going to do 3 total rows of peyote stitch, 1, 2, and then we're going to add a third one in. What I'm going to do is take about 5 feet of thread on a size 10 or 12 needle, and I'm tying those 24 beads that I put on into a loop. I'm tying the loop so that way it is nice and tight and forms that first outer bezel. When you take your rivoli out of the package here, you want to make sure if you're using a different bead, you just want to make sure that it fits basically right in the interior there as you are working, because we're going to be building to the top and the bottom. From that opening row, what we're going to do is we are going to start peyote stitch. So I've tied my knot. I'm going to take my needle and thread back a couple of beads and sew away from me. As I do so, I'm going to start that peyote stitch. Now these are big beads, so you'll see it right away. My thread and needle are exiting from one of the 8O seed beads. I'm going to skip the next one and go to bead number 3. So we're going to say I'm exiting bead number 1. I add a bead and then I sew through bead number 3. Exiting bead number 3, I add a bead, skip over 4, and sew through bead number 5. And you'll get this little brick stitch or brick wall look to the peyote stitch. And the nice thing with the 8Os, this goes really quickly. Add a bead, skip over the next one, sew through basically bead number 3 in line. When you're coming out of the bead, that's bead number 1, add a bead, sew through bead number 2, the next one in line, and sew through the third. So we're going the whole way around here. You're going to end up, because we started with 24 beads, adding 12 beads per row. When you start with peyote stitch and you have your initial starter row, you're actually starting with 2 rows at once. We're starting with row 1 and row 2, and as we add this third row here, these 12 new beads, we actually establish what is bead row number 1 and what is bead number 2 as we're sewing through and adding in our next row of this peyote stitch. So you can see we're going the whole way around, adding these in here, and finishing up the count. Once you have all the way around, you're going to be adding your last bead here, sewing into the first bead your thread was coming out of. And at the same time, we're going to do what's called a step up. We're going to go out with our needle through that first bead that we put on in row number 3. So those last 12 beads that we added, we're going to sew through so that we're coming out of bead number 1. After finishing row number 3, we're going to do one more row of our 8O Delicas. After that, we're going to switch to some 11O Delicas, and I'm just going to pour them out right now so you can see that size difference. What's going to happen with the 11s to the 8s? And if again you need any of those colors, go ahead and look in that section below the video in the notes there. When you switch, we are going to switch, and that's going to pull those 8Os in towards the front as well as the back, front, back, and it's going to create that bezel. So we're going to do one more row around. And just like we did previously, we're going to add a bead and then we're going to skip a bead and sew through. Already we have all the beads that we are going to be sewing through sticking up. So we add our next 8O bead, sew through, add our next 8O bead, sew through the one sticking up. If you need help with any peyote stitches, we can put that on that, I'll put that on that list too. That'll be there underneath in that description. When you click on that link, I'll get you some other peyote videos. As we go around and we do this 4th row of peyote, you're going to start to notice that this is turning into more of a tube shape. You want that to occur. You want that tubular shape to happen and start going around and occurring as part of the design element. Once we're done with row number 4, this is, yes, row number 4, we did rows 1 and 2 by putting that 24 right on. We did row 3 by putting the next 12 on. And then starting row 4, we added in, or we started on bead number 1 from row number 3. As we start row number 5, we're going to be doing the exact same thing for a peyote stitch, but this time instead of using these nice big 8s, we're going to switch down to our 11-0 Delicas. If you have a cabochon or something that you want to use in the same idea, you may want to step down with some 11-0 seed beads. So here I am going back through bead number 1 that my thread was coming out of originally, and then I'm exiting or stepping up to do my next row through the first bead that I put in row number 4, that first bead of 12 that I just added. Again, see how it's kind of curving and it's wanting to go more tubular shape, almost like a wheel or a tire. From here, we're going to switch to 11-0s. So I'm going to add an 11-0 and sew through the next 8-0 Delica. Add 11s, sew through the next one. So naturally, the 11s are smaller than the 8s, which is going to mean that it's going to start pulling in towards the center and rounding out. I want you to do 2 rows of your 11-0 seed beads, and be mindful as you are doing them that you do want them to fold towards the back. This is going to be the back of the pendant that we're going to sit the rivoli in, and then we're going to come back to the front and do the same thing on that front side as well. Once you go through and you have the next 2 rows of Delicas and you really see how that's pulling it back and together because the Delicas are smaller. So naturally they're pulling it from those 8-0s into a smaller space. What that's creating is a little cupping effect. And again, we're almost going to treat it like a tire wheel, that the rivoli, we're going to kind of push those beads back to the side. It's just going to pop in there. As it pops in there, those Delicas hold to the back, and we're going to bring our thread and needle to the front to repeat that same process. So we did rows 5 with the small 11-0 Delica and 6 with that Delica. Now what we're going to do is backtrack, coming and sewing through the design right on a diagonal line, and we'll come back and we can reinforce that back a little bit more to get to the front. Once you get to the front, you want to make sure that your thread is exiting through one of the beads that sticks up. We're going to repeat the same thing on the front, adding an 11-0 seed bead, skipping over the next bead in line, and sewing through the next Delica bead that's sticking up. So actually what we're doing now, we came out of row 6, we're going into row 1. Add a bead, sew into row 1. So it's a nice quick bezel that you're going to go around now, adding in 12 beads connecting that row number 1 to row, we'll call it -1. And then we're going to do -2. So the back with those Delicas will match the front of the design before we go in and build on the outer edge. As you get to the front and you're doing row -2, as we're calling it, you're actually going to use 2 seed beads just for a little bit of kind of a flourished design. You can use 1 if you want to and have it be a little bit bigger, but I thought this one would be nice since that gold really stands out, to put 2 gold Delica beads and then sew through, the next Delica from row -1. So see how that just kind of pulls it in a little bit and makes that little scallop. 2 beads go on instead of 1 and through that next Delica bead in line. After this, we get to start decorating the outside and that exterior edge. One of the things with the 8-0 Delicas is that they do have a very boxy effect because they're big and they have a decent size hole. So while it seems kind of really boxy right now and kind of like they're sticking up and in different locations, as we go in and out our outer edge of our crystals, as well as our drops, that starts to really take form. And because they are bigger, we have also a little bit more substantialness when it comes to the pendant. It's a little bit heavier, and the sides do not fall in at all. So that's the bonus with those biggers and with the drops here. These aren't folding back, they're staying out nice and even with the pendant. So I'm going to continue on here, finishing up, adding 2 of my Delicas at a time, and then we're going to sew out through row number 2 of our 8-0 Delicas. I'll show you when we get there, and we are going to get ready then to start adding our beads to our outer edge with some of our 2mm beautiful Potomac crystal bicones. Once you have that second row, that interior row with your 2 seed beads, it's time to move to the outer edge. So I'm coming out of the first 2 beads that I put on, just like I would be stepping up and doing another row. And instead what we're going to do is step down towards that outer row. And where we want to come out is row 2 of our 8-0 Delicas. So I'm coming out, that initial line that we did of 24 beads, if you remember, had 24 beads, and we attached to row number 1 as we went towards that interior. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the outer edge here, and we are going to add our 2mm bicones in place. So I'm going to pour out my 2mm cobalt bicones here, add that nice bright, this is turning out so rich in these colors, kind of whimsical, kind of rich. We're going to pour out those 2mm, and we're going to go around the whole outer edge, adding a 2mm in, skipping over like we're doing peyote stitch, and going through the next one of our 8-0 Delicas that's in line in that row 2. So there's a really natural place, because those 8-0 Delicas are rather large. There's a natural place that they fit in, and you can follow that natural row. They're going to sit right on top of the 8-0 Delica that's closest to the rivoli. That bright blue really brings in a great look from the outside to the inside as we go around. So we're going to go around adding 12 of these in, and then we're going to add another 12, catching on and doing the same peyote style with our 2mm beads already that are there. So our next row of our stitch, we're going to treat it very much like peyote stitch, where we're going to go through the 2mm that's sticking up. But we are going to add a 15 OC bead, and I'm using that same champagne color to mirror it. We're using that 15 OC bead in between each to fit in that space pretty much exactly. Your 2mm will stick up just ever so slightly as we go around, adding in another 2mm bead to do a full line of 2s. Like I said, it'll stick up just ever so slightly, but we're going to use that to our advantage and catch onto it as we come back and add a final row of our 8s before we add our nice cobalt drops. So going around here, adding in just like we've been doing, 15 2mm, that doesn't want to go on my needle right now, 15, and then sewing to the next 2mm that's already there. And you can see how that nice bright blue really comes into play. The second row just sits ever so slightly above that first row, kind of more to the top. You're going to go ahead and add those 12 beads in there, and then we're going to step up, so we're coming out of crystal number 1 from this row that we're adding of 12. Our next step now as we go around this outer edge of our 2mm beads is to catch on to that 2mm that we just added. So again, I'm stepping up after finishing out that row, coming out through that first 2mm bead that we put on there. From here, you're going to see kind of that little opening. See how that second row sits up ever so slightly from that first row? We're going to add 2 of our Delica beads in the 8-0s and then sew through to the next 2mm bead that's sitting up. So in that group of 12 that we just added, we're going to sew through every one, adding 2 of our 8-0 Delicas between. 2 beads go on, catch into just the 2mm bicone. Don't sew into any of those seed beads. So you can see how it's creating that nice outer edge with that up, down of the crystals occurring. So go ahead, keep going around, adding in your 2 Delicas between each. After you go in and add in your Delica beads, it is now time to go in and add in your drops. So we're coming around and we are going to separate out those 2 Delica beads. Our thread is going to run that same line that we already added, opening up those 2 Delica beads, adding one of our teardrops, and then sewing through the blue bead that we used to add the Delicas on from the last row. Up through the next Delica, and they're going to sit in that pointed section like a herringbone style. If you're familiar with that bead weaving technique, you're going to grab a drop and sew through that next one sitting there. If you notice, sometimes Miyuki drops, Toho drops, any sort of seed beaded drops because of their production, or even check glass drops if you use those in here. You'll notice some are bigger, some are smaller. So just try to make sure that you're picking up a consistent top to the drop. So the drops are all going to be pretty much the same size, but you're going to notice the top where the hole is of the drop can vary slightly. But look how pretty that makes it right away into that star look as we add them on the outer edge. After we do this and add them in the whole way around, 12 of them total, we're going to get ready then to do our clasp and our bail. After we have our whole piece done, you can see how much that blue and those drops really bring into play. We're going to use those drops again on the bail section here at the top. And the bail section, we're almost going to do a butterfly look as we have the beads kind of form to the side and doing a ladder stitch to stitch together. I need to create my first bail by coming out through that first 8-0. So if we were pretending we were stepping up, and we're going to go through the next 8-0, kind of wiggle the space there so that it fits in between those 2 points. I'm going to sew backwards now, down through the design, going through the next 8-0, because I need my thread to circle around. If you've used a very thin thread, you may want to go around the outer edge and reinforce, but if you've used the size 6 dragon thread, you'll be totally fine with this. Going here, I'm going to scoot down below into that little section of my beads. I'm kind of reversing that thread, bringing them through here, turning over, watching where my thread comes out, going through that too. So you just kind of learn to follow the thread path while not interrupting the design. So here my thread path does not go right away up to the bead that I just added, but I'm going to make it do so anyway. From here, I'm going to ladder stitch or square stitch, depending on how you look at it, one bead on top of the other. So I'm coming out of one 8-0, I'm adding another 8-0, and then I'm sewing back through that 8-0. I'm going to do the same thing again, adding an 8-0, sewing through the one that I'm coming out of with the thread coming out the right and then going into the left, going back up to the top. This time what I'm going to do is bring some of those teardrops into play. So I'm going to add 2 teardrops, and then I'm going to sew back down through bead number 2. And those will kind of fan out right there, almost like butterfly wings. Once again, add 2 beads and go up through the top. Add 2 more ladder stitch beads going on here, and then we're going to repeat the same thing. So bead goes on, no drops get added. Back up through the last bead. Bead goes on, gets added, taking your thread from the opposite side, going back through that bead that your thread is coming out of, and here's where we're going to add those butterfly wings again. 2 drops get added, go through bead number 1 that you added in that same regard, and then of course I need 2 more drops out to add another one. And then what we're going to do is ladder stitch on a couple more of our Delica beads. So see how those sit again, just like those dragon wings. I think they're a really fun clasp, bail, and running through here, getting 1, 2 beads on really quickly. And then we're going to do a 3rd bead and a 4th bead. So you can see I'm kind of power stitching through here, getting those beads on. Now, you can add extra butterfly wings if you want, but honestly they're going to be at the back, so it doesn't really matter. From here, after you're coming out of your last bead, we are going to bend this down towards the back. Towards the back, if you draw a direct line from the start of the bail to the back of the piece, you'll notice that you line up perfectly with one of your other 8-0 Delicas from row number 4 back there. What was row number 4? That innermost row towards the back of the 8-0s. I'm going to sew through that bead, coming in on the same side. So my thread was coming out the right there. I sewed in from right, and then I'm going to go into the left here and just square stitching or ladder stitching this together as well. But we're not adding any beads. We're sewing into the bead that's already there. I'm going to go through here and just connect this 2 more times, going in. Oops. Try not to catch your thread on anything. And then my last step, all I have to do to finish up this beautiful Delica Duet with the 11s and the 8 Delicas is sew my thread and needle down the project towards the back here, connecting back through this bead here, back along that opening line till I get to the point where my threads match. That thread that I started with, that tail, and the thread end that I'm ending with. Line them up so that they disappear here in the back. and simply tie a knot. Right over left, left over right. It'll hang out in the back of the design. You'll never see it. The green color blends in really nicely with beige and with blue. Grab your thread wrap, your thread burner, burn those thread edges down, and then flat to the project to finish off your design. And then you have that fun butterfly wing look here at the top of the pendant. You can add it on to a nice already pre-finished chain like so, or you can add a seed beaded chain. What I would suggest if you're doing a seed beaded chain, use these drops in your gold Delicas and make a nice little chain to attach it to. Thanks so much for joining me in the creation of this Delica Duet Pendant. It's super fun to have short. Like I said, you can make a chain for it as well, and it's just a really nice, quick setting using 8/0 Delicas for your rivoli. Remember, if you want to have any questions, you have any additional information or things to share with the Potomac bead community, please do so in the comments below and help out other beaders as well as us make sure that we're getting you the correct information and the designs you love. As always, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and stay with us for our next inspirational design. Thanks so much, Potomac beaders, and I look forward to bringing you more.